Hey, Cana, how are you
Hello.
doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Doing great. So we are doing a new thing with the essay. I don't have a name for this yet. We probably should come up with some sort of name, but
Probably should have come up with one before we did this video,
before we
but
hit
it's too
record.
late.
But yeah, that's okay. So we are doing kind of like a bi-weekly, maybe every week, just student highlight. I think HST has such a unique and really great student body, and I would love to, being off campus rep and just with the world of Zoom that we live on, give a space to highlight and get to know students that we might not otherwise get to see. Because even though I'm on campus or near campus now, for a long time I was living in Texas, and you get to know students through classes and things like that, but it's just kind of hard to build your student community when you're doing virtual, and that's what a lot of our students are doing. So I thought we would give us space to just learn more about our awesome students at HST, and I thought you'd be a great one to start with. So how does that
Thanks.
sound?
I think that sounds awesome.
Awesome. So first question, we're just going to do basics. Where do you live? What are you studying and like currently doing along with school?
Yeah, so I am in Memphis, Tennessee. I live on campus. You can tell because of the cinder block apartment
That's
behind
right.
me. But I've lived here on campus, I think, for like 3.5 years, maybe. This is my 5th year of my Master's of Divinity. And I am most of the way done with my classes. I just sort of have a few things here and there, and then my practical stuff to finish. I live with my sister, Bethany, who also goes to school here and
Mm-hmm.
works in the admissions office. She works full time in the admissions office. I work part time in the admissions office.
Yeah.
And I also work a little bit in the library. So, and I worship with the Holmes Road Church. That's my congregation here in town. So,
Awesome. Great. Library is a good place to work.
yeah, it
That's
is a
great.
great place to work.
So a lot of these questions would be just try to get to know you. So when you think about ministry and church and maybe what's at your studies, what makes you excited about the future of the church or ministry?
So, thinking kind of a little bit about what's happening right now. I
This
am
is
not.
during COVID, the COVID
We're it's
life.
coronavirus time. One of the things that's happening right now that I think has been really interesting is not just accessibility of each local church that's really increased, I think, which is really important as we consider like those in like the family of God that are
Mhm.
disabled or have chronic pain or might be dealing with children in their home, and it's just a real big deal to get them out and into church.
Yes.
I think the increase of that is a really positive thing, sort of the accessibility of the church local to the church sort of larger. But I also think like this has given me an opportunity to meet with a lot of different types of congregations that I knew their preacher, or I knew somebody who worked at their congregation,
Mm,
or somebody who's just a regular church member, and I get to log in and worship with them on a weekly basis. So I think perhaps like right now what I'm excited about is the expanding connections that we're going to get to have, and hopefully deeper connections kind of as that goes along,
yes.
both to churches and to church communities and to members of the body in various locations. I myself have worshiped with probably 6 or 8 congregations, at least 2 Sundays in a row, in various parts of the United States since we started all this in March. So that's been really awesome for me. And that gives me a lot of hope that maybe once we sort of get through this particular part of our struggle, that we can increase that, continue to maintain some of those
Mm,
things, and sort of draw people in that way. It's a lot less threatening to visit a new church if you can visit with them online first and
yes.
kind of get a feel for what's going on. So um, I'm hopeful about that. I think that might be really good.
Yeah, I think that's so right. HST might need to provide some sort of online minister track if things keep moving the way they are. Natalie's grandparents, I think, watch like 8 services every Sunday. They just cannot get enough, which
My
is a
parents
great
do
blessing.
one on Saturday night from Singapore, and then they
Oh,
have
wow.
their church on Sunday morning, and then another church on Sunday evening. So it's not 8, but it's not none.
Oh,
So
yeah, for sure. So, speaking of coronavirus, and I think there's been some blessings from this, but I also think it's made us consider how we stay emotionally and spiritually healthy. So, think about maybe COVID, but also just balancing like life and school. What have you found to be emotionally kind of stabilizing for you or spiritually stabilizing?
um, so one of the things that's always been kind of important to me in my own sort of spiritual growth has been spending good time in prayer.
Mm.
I learned this from my mother, who is a really substantial person of prayer. She spends a lot of time early in the mornings, late at night in prayer. And so I think this has kind of helped me maybe not get back on track for prayer, but certainly sort of reforge a new path forward for the way that I spend my time in prayer and how much time I spend in prayer. I think there's not a lot of places to hide when I can't go out to see my friends in the evenings or plan dinners with so and so. And so that's actually been good. I think it's also been important, specifically in light of coronavirus and the current political climate and all of our dealings with the increasingly visible racial tensions.
Yes.
I think it's been important for me emotionally to presume the best and presume good from others. Not to just sort of ignore red flags if someone's a repeated offender, like clearly that's something that they've got going on that's deeper. But I know that I have needed a lot more grace in the last 6 months. And more crucially, I think that grace has been more visible to me, how much I need it from other people. And so to be able to cultivate a hand of grace first, a hand of mercy first, rather than to assume that when my sister or somebody else is upset, or if somebody snaps at me in the grocery store, to sort of assume that, like, yeah, they do have something going on. We're all kind of going through something right now. And so I hope that that's something that I can continue to keep, because I think it has been an emotionally healthy place for me to move out of through this whole thing. So
I think that is very wise. I think we sometimes, with that idea, kind of carry those when we don't even realize it. We'll carry those assumptions and kind of negative emotions that we'll interact with. I think that idea of grace, though, is a beautiful one of just being able to let go and hold on to what really matters. If that makes sense, I think that kind of goes along with what you said. That's some great insight. Thank you, Cana. So a bit of a lighter question. When you think about trying to balance school, work, life, what are hobbies that you enjoy doing or try to find time for?
Oh man. Well, if you would look at my bank statement, the answer is that I do a lot of traveling, and that's pretty much where I keep my money. I don't make a lot of money, but if I have extra money, that's where it goes.
That's where it's going. Yeah.
So in December, I was able to take a trip to see a friend of mine in Budapest, Hungary, and I took 3 days sort of on pilgrimage of kind in Venice, Italy. I spent with myself, some time with the Lord, some devotional things, a lot of quiet. And so I spend a lot of money traveling, and I really like to travel. I like all kinds of travel. I like train travel and planes, and I really like boats. I'm a road trip gal, so I spend a lot of time doing traveling, seeing new places. I think there's something really honest about seeing a location with fresh eyes that are interested to see what it has to offer. I try to look with that to my own cities, the places that I live, to try to value them for what they have, both perfect and imperfect. I also like to read, but I feel like that's a pretty typical answer for people who are in seminary.
It's just yes, you kind of have to do that.
If you don't, I maybe recommend another program. I don't know. Just kidding. Don't go to another program.
Don't leave.
But I do like to read, and I like to read all sorts of things. I like to read poetry, and I like to read things that are theological, but not necessarily related to what I'm doing in a given semester. And I try to keep up with like news articles, books of essays, fantasy novels. I'm not like super picky. I like mystery books. I was big like Encyclopedia Brown as a kid. That was my thing. So I highly recommend them if you have children. So I do a lot of that as well. But the good news is that you can read while you travel. So it's really a 2-for-1.
Yeah, you're just getting everything done.
Efficient system.
That's right. That's great. That's great. So talking about school, and you get to travel sometimes and read and do both at the same time. What has been for you a challenge of doing school full time and trying to work? Like when you reflect back on your years at HST, what's been a challenge? And I think this is important to ask just so new students get to hear like, oh, not everyone has it figured out perfectly. And it's like, life's great. Like, no, sometimes things are not great and it's difficult, but we make it through those things.
I think I started at HST as a smart enough person, but I think that at this point in my HST career, I am a much better student than I was at the beginning. And I think learning how to prioritize my time well, and to set aside certain times where I'll focus on my schoolwork, rather than just sort of hoping that I have time in between the other things of my life. And that's hard, that's difficult. It requires a lot more discipline than I'm used to or good at. But I think that I'm better at it now. And so learning to sort of delineate between time for given things and knowing when to take that barrier down and say, like, this is a more important task. What I'm doing is more crucial. And so sometimes when we were meeting in person, you remember crowds.
Kind of,
At Holmes Road, I don't know. At Holmes Road, we would have Sunday nights with the young adults every other week. And I would often have homework that I needed to go back over, some notes to look over, some vocab to run before Monday morning. But I knew that if I would work Sunday afternoon to get my classwork ready, then I needed to go. I needed to take a break. I needed to go and do some things with my spiritual community. And that if there was more to do, then the Lord would either give me time to do it before I went to bed, or it would just have to be left undone. And so I think there are times in which your personal barriers need to shift for your academic ones. And I think that there are times when your academic barriers need to shift for your personal ones. And so I think learning how to discern between those two things has been something that I have worked on. I also just think, like, in general, like setting aside time for my own spiritual stuff. One quote that really I keep in my head a lot is from Ann Voskamp. And she says, activity for God is not the same as intimacy with God. And so I have to remember that though there is a ministry to my study, that there is an investment in my community when I minister to others, that I still have to make sure that I don't mistake one for the other.
Yes, that's so good. That is so good. Okay, one final question. We do have a speed round that we'll end with, but kind of more in-depth question. What is next for Cana after graduating? What are your hopes and dreams and aspirations?
Well, if anybody has any suggestions, I'd love to hear them. No, I'm still a little bit from graduation, so this is kind of a difficult question in some senses.
Yes.
And my calling, I'm aware, is a bit of a contentious subject for some people. But I think sort of my focus in terms of my faith and my work in my faith,
yes,
is that in whatever context I'm in, whatever kind of ministry or non-ministry setting that I'm in, that my actions and my words show the absolute abundance of God's table for all people. That this is not a table with limited seats or limited food, and it goes on into eternity. And that any community that I invest myself in will desire that, to make that publicity known. If God came for all, God came for all. And so I think that as far as my focus, I want whatever ministry or even non-technical ministry, non-named ministry, to really prioritize the openness, the welcoming nature of God's table. So.
Thank you. That's a great thing to strive for. Even if you don't know what the
we'll
details are.
Out.
Yes. Hey, I think if you pursue that, God will be with you in that for sure. Okay, so here's the fun part. I'm gonna race through these questions and speed round. First answer that comes to mind. So if you could eat dinner with any character from the Bible besides Jesus, who would it be?
The prophet Miriam. I have a tattoo of a tambourine just for her. So.
Okay, there you go. Perfect. One sentence. Why?
I think that she's a complicated character and someone I associate with, but I also think she has a lot to teach us.
Great. Okay, next one. Favorite book you have read in the past year?
Wendell Berry's This Day, which is a collection of Sabbath sermons. My father got it for me for Christmas last year, and it's excellent. It's very thick, so it will take you some time to read through it, but it's great. It's a great book.
Good deal. Describe 2020 in one word.
Unexpected.
That's great. I love it. Let's see. Favorite movie of all time?
I think probably The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Every time I watch it, I sit and I'm like, oh, this is my favorite scene. And then the next scene rolls on. I'm like, no, wait, I lied. This is my favorite scene. And then the next one goes. And then anyway, but I will say I watched The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, the most recent version with Ben Stiller, probably once a month or maybe once every other month. Wow. In terms of viewability, I watch that one a lot. So.
Good to know. Okay, final question. What do you love most about the city you live in? So what do you love most about Memphis?
Good question. I think that Memphis is an honest city. I think a lot of cities aren't honest. I think that's part of the reason I like New York, is that though there are some ways in which like Memphis puts on a front, there are always ways in which like a city itself expresses like what it wants to be, what it thinks it ought to be. But I think some cities are kind of fake, but I don't think Memphis is. I think Memphis is an honest city, and that like for good and for ill, it acknowledges like, or is seeking to acknowledge like what it is. And so like a lot of people I think are like Memphis, they kind of turn up their nose, but like I love living in Memphis. I'd rather live in Memphis than live in any part of any of the rest of Tennessee. So
There you go. That's a great go Memphis. I grew up here. That's awesome. Well, Cana, thank you so much for joining me in this installment episode, whatever we will call these weird things that we're doing. But we appreciate you, and we're so glad that you are at HST.
Well, it's fun to be here, and thanks for having me.
Great. Okay. See ya.